It was 2 a.m. when I read the words that shattered me, the kind of sentence that clung to my ribs like fire. My chest locked, and I could not undo what I had just seen. The message said, "No, I won't save you. You must face yourself." My stomach dropped. I wanted to scream, but silence pressed harder. I replayed the sentence, tasting each word like iron on my tongue. Daniel said, "You can't rely on me this time." His refusal sliced through the armor I thought I had built. My heart raced as shame clawed at me. I wanted rescue, but what I got was truth. In that instant, I saw my cowardice laid bare, and it burned hotter than rejection. I remembered every mask I had ever worn to look strong, every smile that hid a desperate plea for approval. My mind begged for denial, but my body knew the wound had already opened. There was no safe way back. Daniel's silence afterward screamed louder than his words. I realized that every bargain I had made for safety had been a slow erosion of myself. And now, the cost was no longer avoidable. I was alone, and the only path was through my fear. The glow of the phone had faded, but the words remained etched inside me like fire branded on skin. I sat frozen, unable to move, staring at the blank ceiling as though it might answer the ache in my chest. My hands trembled against my lap, the silence in the room louder than any thunder. I wanted to pretend it hadn't happened, to erase the sentence that had undone me, but denial slipped through my fingers like sand. Daniel's refusal wasn't just about tonight. It was about every time I had begged for rescue instead of standing alone. My breath caught, shallow and uneven, and the quiet pressed down with the weight of years. I remembered every mask I had worn, every bargain I had made to look strong, and each one cracked in memory. My body curled forward, but the truth stayed upright in my chest. There was no going back, no undoing. The sentence had been spoken, and I was the one left to live with its echo. Morning arrived without mercy. The sunlight that spilled across the floor didn't feel warm. It exposed me. I avoided the mirror in the hallway, afraid to meet the eyes that carried shame too heavy to face. My reflection had always been rehearsed, perfected with careful smiles, but I knew if I looked now, the mask would be gone. Daniel's refusal echoed in my ears like a verdict. The lie I had built, that I was strong because I was needed, collapsed under the weight of his silence. My chest pounded, as if trying to break free of the prison I had locked myself in. I brushed my teeth, dressed, went through the motions of life, but each action felt hollow. The boy who wanted to be saved was still screaming inside me, and for the first time I heard him clearly. I wasn't strong, I was terrified, and the mask could not hide it anymore. At breakfast, the silence of the apartment mocked me. I sat at the table, staring at a slice of toast that tasted like sand in my mouth. Every bite felt forced, my jaw tight, throat unwilling to swallow. I wanted to call Daniel, to beg him to take back his words, to tell me he didn't mean them. But deep down I knew he wouldn't. He had handed me a truth I couldn't escape, and no amount of pleading would return me to ignorance. My chest ached, a hollow pit opening wider with every passing second. The rules I had lived by, smile, serve, obey, suddenly looked like shackles. I gripped my mug tighter, desperate for something solid. Daniel's voice played again in memory, sharp but steady. "You must face yourself." I realized then that the cost of silence was my soul, and I had already given too much away. Later I walked through the city, headphones pressed into my ears but no music playing. The streets moved with life, cars honking, voices chattering, footsteps rushing, but inside me was silence, broken only by Daniel's words replaying endlessly. I had thought the mask made me safe, but as I walked, I realized it had only caged me. Each step felt like falling into an unknown I wasn't ready for. My chest tightened, but I kept moving because stillness felt like death. Daniel's refusal had stripped me bare, leaving me exposed in ways I couldn't hide. The crowd didn't notice me, and for once I didn't want them to. I wasn't invisible, I was unmasked. And the question haunted me, without the bargains, without the armor, who was I now? The answer didn't come, but the silence itself felt like a beginning. The wound began long before Daniel's refusal. It began in the living room of my childhood, where voices rose like storms around me, and I learned my role by instinct. The rule was unspoken but absolute. Don't make trouble, just be useful. I wore that rule like skin. I picked up toys before anyone asked, fetched glasses of water, and smiled even when the shouting rattled the walls. My silence bought peace, or at least that's what I believed. Daniel once said, "Masks may keep you alive, but they starve you." I thought he was talking about someone else. I didn't know he was describing me. Every ritual I built, smiling when I ached, agreeing when I wanted to scream, wasn't strength. It was a contract I didn't sign but still obeyed. My chest burns when I remember that boy kneeling small, trading truth for safety. The lie I carried wasn't cowardice, it was survival painted as virtue, and it branded me for years. Adulthood did not free me. It only dressed the cage differently. In the office, I became the dependable one, the man who never said no, who always absorbed the work others left behind. My manager smiled when I stayed late, colleagues praised my reliability, and friends called me strong. But the praise wasn't light, it was a collar, tightening each time I accepted. I told myself sacrifice was love, that exhaustion was dignity, that silence was loyalty. But Daniel once told me, your worth is not measured by your exhaustion. I laughed when he said it. But now the words cut deep. My chest aches when I see the truth. I wasn't admired, I was being consumed. My martyrdom looked like devotion, but it was only fuel for others. I thought I was needed. I was only being used. The freedom I craved stayed out of reach because I kept handing it away with every smile that said, "Of course, I'll do it." The mask became second nature. At mirrors, I practiced smiles until they fit, rehearsed expressions so polished that even I believed them. My reflection became a stranger I was forced to impersonate. Daniel once asked me, "Who are you when no one is watching?" I answered with silence, because silence was all I had left. I feared what lived beneath the mask, feared that if I peeled it away, there would be nothing underneath. Only emptiness. The lie convinced me that pretending was safer than facing myself. But last night's refusal from Daniel cracked something I couldn't repair. I stood at the mirror, staring at the fractured version of myself, and for the first time I admitted the truth. The mask hadn't protected me. It had devoured me. Every grin was a cage. Every nod was a lock. My chest burned with shame, but also with the first faint flicker of rebellion. The mask was cracking, and the man behind it was gasping for air. The rules lived inside me, quiet but brutal. They weren't written down, but they were carved into my chest. Never ask for help, never show anger, never take up too much space. These rules became a script, shaping how I breathed, how I sat in rooms, how I disappeared inside my own life. They were armor once, forged in fear, but now they pressed down like iron. Daniel once said, "Rules can be cages." Back then, I thought he was wrong. Tonight, I feel the bars. Every decision I made bowed to those rules, shrinking me smaller with each passing day. I wore invisibility like honor, but the cost was unbearable. My body aches under the weight of loyalty to lies I never agreed to keep. I am tired of being silent, tired of being safe, tired of carrying chains that no one else even sees. The rules promised belonging but delivered emptiness. The mask slipped by accident. I was at a cafe with Emma, laughing at something small when she looked at me suddenly and said, "You don't have to pretend with me." Her voice was soft, but it cut sharper than any blade. My smile faltered before I could hold it steady. The mask cracked for a single breath, and the boy inside me leaned forward, begging not to be buried again. Daniel's words returned, haunting but tender. "Real anchors don't hide you, they hold you steady." Emma's eyes saw through me without accusation, and for the first time, I felt both terrified and free. My mask was not invincible. It was paper thin, trembling, ready to collapse. The truth frightened me, but it also beckoned me forward. For the first time I wondered if someone could love the man beneath the mask, the man I had hidden even from myself. At work, the storm broke quietly. I said no for the first time when Richard asked me to stay late. His smile tightened, thin as glass, and he replied, "We'll all make sacrifices here." The words slid under my skin like knives. My throat closed. I wanted to argue, to scream, but silence rushed in, heavy and familiar. My chest pounded as Daniel's memory pressed into me. "Every time you stay quiet, someone profits." The truth cut deeper now. My silence wasn't noble, it was currency, and I had been giving it away for years. Richard looked satisfied, not because I agreed, but because I didn't resist. My fists curled at my sides, shaking with rage I couldn't voice. Each second of silence betrayed me. I realized then that my compliance wasn't survival anymore. It was surrender. That night, I opened a drawer and pulled out a letter from my mother, one I had read 100 times. Her handwriting looped across the page, praising me as the peacemaker. My chest tightened as I traced the words. Once they comforted me, now they weighed me down. Daniel's warning echoed sharp as glass. "Beware of affection that costs you truth." My stomach turned. Her pride wasn't free. It was a contract I didn't choose. Every line chained me to silence, to roles that erased who I was. I wanted to tear the letter, but instead I folded it carefully, my hands shaking. It wasn't comfort anymore. It was a cage disguised as love. The next day at the cafe, Emma studied me across the table. She tilted her head, eyes sharp but kind. "You look like you're carrying a mountain," she said. I forced a laugh, but it cracked halfway, brittle and false. My mask slipped, and her gaze caught the truth. Panic surged through me. For years, I had hidden beneath smiles, but Daniel's refusal had split me open. I wanted to retreat, to rebuild the wall, but my throat closed. Silence pressed harder, this time not as safety but as betrayal. Emma didn't flinch. Her steady eyes burned like fire, daring me to stop pretending. My chest ached with fear, but also with relief, as if the mask was begging to fall. That night, I couldn't sleep. I tossed under twisted blankets, my body trembling. My younger self screamed inside me, furious and raw. "Why do you always choose them before me?" His voice wasn't kind, it was desperate. Daniel's words thundered, "Your silence betrays the child you once were." My adult self wanted safety, but the child demanded honesty. My chest burned with the war between them. I pressed my palms against my face, gasping, unable to quiet the storm. For years, I had silenced him, burying his pain beneath duty and smiles. But he was louder now, unrelenting. My body shook as the truth surfaced. I wasn't failing only myself anymore. I was failing the boy who once begged for protection. During a family call, the conflict sharpened. My father George smiled on the screen, his voice proud. "You've always been the dependable one." My stomach dropped, my chest knotted. His words sounded like love, but they clanged like shackles. Silence filled my throat, but anger rose hotter. Daniel's voice echoed, "When memory feels too perfect, test it." My father's praise was not memory, it was myth, built on my silence. I stared at his face on the screen, warm and certain, while my own reflection in the dark window looked pale and broken. The story they told about me was not mine. My silence hadn't preserved peace, it had preserved control. And suddenly, the ground beneath me tilted, unstable, as if the life I had trusted no longer belonged to me at all. One evening, I opened Daniel's old journal, the one he had once left with me, as if it were nothing. My fingers traced the spine, trembling as though it carried heat. His handwriting flowed across the page, firm and steady, filled with thoughts I had never read before. Then a line stopped me cold. "I will not rescue those who have already rescued me." My chest locked as though someone had slammed a door from the inside. I had thought of him as savior, imagined him as the man who held me together when I was too weak to stand. But the truth cracked open in front of me. I had been the anchor once, the one who steadied him when his own storm threatened to drown him. The myth of my weakness collapsed, shattering like glass across the floor. Daniel's voice echoed in memory. Strength is not something I give. It is what you claim. Tonight, I finally understood. The realization pressed deeper. For years, I had carried silence as though it were cowardice, a flaw that revealed my fragility. But tonight, the truth surged. Silence had been competence. I had learned it in a house where speaking carried punishment, where quiet was survival. Daniel once said, "Even avoidance is intelligence, if it keeps you alive." I dismissed him then, but now his words felt like medicine. My silence was not weakness. It was a weapon sharpened in the dark. But weapons lose their purpose when the battle ends. My armor, once necessary, was now suffocating me. My chest burned as I admitted the truth. What I thought was failure was the reason I survived. My flaw was not cowardice. It was strength, misnamed and misunderstood. And now I had to let it go before it strangled me entirely. A memory rose, sharp and uninvited. Years ago, Daniel had leaned across a cafe table, his voice raw as he admitted he needed me. I had dismissed it then, thinking he was only being kind, a mentor softening a blow. But now, I replayed his eyes, steady, serious, and realized he had been telling me the truth. He was not my rescuer. He was my witness. He had seen me, leaned on me, trusted me. My chest shook as I whispered aloud, "Then I was strong all along." The words left me trembling. Daniel once told me, "Help exists where you refuse to look." For years I thought he meant other people, but now I knew he meant the reflection I had always avoided. My body trembled as I met the truth. I was not powerless. I had been my own anchor before. I could be again. My memories began to bleed in new colors. Phrases once spoken with pride now sounded like contracts. Don't cause trouble, be the strong one. For years, I had called them love, but tonight I saw them for what they were. Agreements carved to keep me silent. Daniel once told me, "Listen to how the past rewrites itself." His words echoed as my chest pounded. Those sentences weren't care, they were cages dressed as tenderness. I felt the burn rise inside me, as if every repetition of those phrases had left scars along my ribs. The truth rang sharp. The bargains were never love. They were tools to keep the peace at my expense. My chest rose with fire as the words escaped my mouth. I wrote my own cage. And if I wrote it, I could break it. The story they built wasn't mine, and I didn't have to live inside it anymore. The question sharpened, heavy and unrelenting. Who am I if I accept this truth? Daniel's refusal replayed in my head, no longer cruel but clear. His silence wasn't abandonment, it was invitation. My younger self stirred within me, no longer screaming but waiting, patient and fierce. Emma's laughter echoed too, reminding me that love didn't vanish when the mask slipped, it deepened. My chest tightened as if the world tilted toward one inevitable decision. The silence I had carried my whole life was no longer survival, it was choice. And that choice demanded transformation. I felt my breath deepen, slow and certain, as the mask I had worn for decades began to loosen. The cost was clear. To step into truth meant to bury the old bargain. The question would not leave me. Would I let the mask fall, or would I let it bury me alive? The call with my father began as it always did, his voice warm, steady, almost rehearsed. "I'm proud of you," he said. "You've always been the one we can depend on." For years, those words had been my lifeline, proof that my sacrifices meant something. Tonight, they landed differently. They sounded like shackles polished into compliments. My chest tightened as I realized the praise was built on a bargain I had never chosen. Daniel's words thundered, "Integrity is the event." My breath hitched, throat dry, palms slick with sweat. I'd hear myself choosing between silence and truth. "Finally," I whispered, "I can't be the one who never makes trouble anymore." The words cracked in my mouth like breaking glass. Silence followed, long and unbearable, stretching like an abyss. My chest ached, my body shook, but I stayed inside the truth. I had spoken the sentence that locked the old door behind me. The silence stretched on, each second heavy enough to crush me. Then my father's voice returned, softer than I expected. "I don't understand." His words cut sharper than anger, because confusion meant the myth I upheld no longer fit. My chest trembled, but I didn't retreat. "You don't have to," I said quietly. "I do." The words seemed fragile, but they were solid as stone beneath me. Daniel had warned, "Truth will crack the ground you stand on." Tonight, I felt the earth tilt beneath my feet, trembling and uncertain, but it didn't swallow me. My father's approval had been the currency I built my identity on, and now I had spent it all in one breath. The silence on the line was not reconciliation, but it was freedom. My chest ached, but air filled me anyway. I stood by the window, phone forgotten on the bed, rain streaking down the glass in silver trails. My reflection blurred back at me, hollow-eyed but alive. My chest heaved and I whispered, "No more bargains." The sentence startled me, raw and sharp, but it felt like fire in my veins. For years I had traded my truth for safety, bartered my voice for peace. But the mask had never protected me, it had only buried me. Daniel's words echoed, "Every vow you keep to yourself is a rescue." Tonight, I rescued myself. Fear pulsed still, sharp and relentless, but alongside it came a strange, aching relief. The emptiness stretched before me, vast and uncertain, but it no longer resembled a void. It looked like space. Space for breath, for choice, for life I hadn't yet dared to live. When I met Emma the next day, she studied me with quiet intensity. "You look different," she said softly. "Lighter." I laughed, but it wasn't defensive. It was real, fragile, but free. "I finally stopped auditioning for my own life," I admitted. The words startled me, but they rang with truth. My chest tightened, waiting for rejection, for her to walk away from this unmasked version of me. But she didn't. Instead, she reached across the table, her hand warm against mine. Her eyes didn't demand performance. They welcomed me as I was, raw and unpolished. For the first time, love didn't feel conditional. Daniel once said, "True bonds don't fear the unedited." I realized then that the mask I wore had not protected love, it had starved it. Without the mask, love could finally breathe. That night, silence filled my apartment again, but this time it did not suffocate. It settled like a blanket, heavy but bearable. I sat cross-legged on the floor, back against the wall, staring at nothing and everything. The old bargains were ash now, burned and gone. My chest rose slow and steady, each breath proof I was still here. I thought of Daniel's refusal, of Emma's hand, of my younger self's insistent voice. They had conspired to bring me here not as saviors but as mirrors. The cost of truth was real. I had lost approval, roles, a sense of belonging. But what I gained was greater. The emptiness stretched inside me, vast and raw, but it no longer felt like absence. It felt like space for something real to begin. For the first time, silence was mine. The morning after felt strangely quiet. I walked through my apartment, noticing how different the silence sounded. It wasn't heavy anymore. It was clear, almost breathable. I put away the old notebook filled with rules, and realized I no longer needed them. Daniel once said, "You'll know you've chosen truth when silence feels like air." For the first time I understood. The rituals of overwork and constant caretaking seemed distant, like clothes that no longer fit. My space felt smaller, but it was mine. I made coffee slowly, not rushing as I once did. Every sip felt like a small declaration that I no longer had to prove my worth by running faster. Emma called and asked if I wanted to meet, and I said yes without hesitation. My chest didn't tighten. It was simple, easy, ordinary. Daniel had told me, freedom feels smaller at first, then it expands. I smiled quietly into my mug. He was right. Later, I walked through the park. The city still bustled. People hurried with headphones in, but I didn't feel invisible anymore. I wasn't performing, just walking. Emma met me there, her smile warm and unforced. She said, "You look lighter." I laughed, not defensively this time, but freely. I didn't owe the world my silence. The old mask was gone, and I didn't miss it. That night, I sat at my desk and read the old letter from my mother again. This time, I didn't crumble. Her words about me being the peacemaker no longer felt like a sentence. They were history, not prophecy. Daniel had said, "Return what no longer belongs to you." I folded the letter gently, placed it back in its envelope, and felt no need to carry it further. The rule was retired. The burden had been set down. As I prepared for sleep, I realized the fear of emptiness had been a trick. The emptiness was space, room to breathe, to choose, to live. My chest rose with quiet steadiness. I didn't need to fill the silence with bargains or masks. The silence was mine now. Daniel's refusal, Emma's laughter, my younger self's demands, all of it had led me here. The rituals had ended, and in their place was freedom. The world looked unchanged, but I felt different. Walking through the city, I noticed how people rushed past, carrying their own masks, their own bargains. I didn't envy them anymore. My silence was no longer armor, it was choice. Daniel once said, "Transformation is not noise, it is steady ground." For the first time, the ground beneath me felt real. Every step forward carried weight, not as burden but as proof. I wasn't invisible anymore. I was present. I stopped by the old cafe where Daniel once spoke those hard words. The table felt smaller now, the memory less intimidating. I could almost hear him say, "You were never powerless." I smiled, not with bitterness but gratitude. His refusal had been the sharpest kindness. My chest loosened, and I knew I no longer feared his silence. His absence wasn't abandonment, it was the space for me to rise. At home, I stood before the mirror. This time I didn't avoid my reflection. I looked into my own eyes and said quietly, "I choose you." The younger self inside me seemed to settle, no longer demanding but resting. I thought of all the times I silenced him, and now he was finally heard. Daniel had said, "The only rescue that lasts is the one you give yourself." I smiled faintly, seeing not a mask, but a face that was mine, unedited and unashamed. That night, Emma called, her voice warm and steady. She said, "I don't need you to be perfect, just real." I closed my eyes and breathed. The old bargain of caretaking, of performance, dissolved in that moment. My voice was quiet but true when I said, "Then real is what I'll give." The silence after wasn't heavy. It was shared, alive. Love didn't vanish when I shed the mask. It grew. The final truth came like a whisper but settled like stone. I no longer needed approval, contracts, or masks. I stood in the quiet of my room, breathing evenly, and said aloud, "I will not audition for my own life." The words echoed back, steady and unshaken. The circle closed where it began, with one irreversible sentence. Only this time it was not a wound, it was a vow.